Welcome back to 1834 Restoration House. A couple days ago, June 11th, we were supposed to close on our house. We didn't. Major disappointment, but hopefully we'll do it sometime this week. We'll see. So in the meantime, we are here at the 96 National Historic Site, and the silhouette of a soldier beside me is a representation of many silhouettes they have throughout this national site.
South Carolina is well known for its role in the Civil War, but what a lot of people don't realize is that South Carolina also played a role in the Revolutionary War. Now, we were taught in school that Boston, Philadelphia, those were the places where the Revolutionary War was fought, but that's not entirely true. Down here in South Carolina, right here at the 96 National Historic Site, is the remnants of an epic battle that happened between the British and the Americans in 1780. If you look through the trees over here, you just catch a glimpse of the site. I'd like to introduce you to the characters. Okay, first of all, there are the Loyalists who were loyal to the British side, and they wanted to remain under Britain control. And then you had the Patriots, our side, if you will, who wanted freedom, who wanted to be Americans, free from British rule. And for those of you who are watching in Great Britain, we love you guys, you're awesome, but this was 250 years ago, whatever it was. Then you had the British. And so the British, they wanted South Carolina, and they wanted it bad. And they tried twice to capture it, 2 times. The first time, they tried to capture Charleston, and they failed. Well, then they came back for a second try. That time, Charleston fell to the British. And they started to push their way inland. So now, the Patriots are trying hard to maintain their independence, but they had a problem. And those were the Loyalists, the people who were living amongst them who wanted to stay British. And unfortunately, some of those people may have been family, friends, neighbors, and that put people against each other. Very unfortunate situation, but it's part of history, and so we have to mention that here. So let's go on down the road and see what happens next. This is a diagram of the entire stockade. So they had a stockade fort over here, and then this was the actual village of 96. The Loyalists had this fort. They fortified it with 14-foot walls. They had tree trunks here to act as a barricade, and then they had a moat. And I don't know if they filled that with water or what they did, but they also had this stuff called abatis. Now it says here that abatis is a menacing ring of sharpened tree branches around the fort which were intended to hinder the enemy's approach. Now, here come the Patriots. And the Patriots are like, how can we take this fort down? Well, they did several things. They built a rifle tower, which is out there in the field and has been reconstructed. We'll show that to you in a minute. But the most innovative thing that they did was they built these trenches. The trench started there, and it zigzagged through here and all the way up behind the camera over to where the fort used to be. Over the last 250 years, rainwater and erosion has caused the trenches to fill in and the mounds to become less and less over time. But you can still see the shadows of where the trenches used to be. At one time, they were about 3 feet deep.
This is a replica of a cannon that was used in battle at the site.
In a single night, the Patriots built a rifle tower just like this one here. This is a replica, but the original tower was 30 feet high, and from that vantage point they could look right down into the fort and start firing their rifles at people down inside there. Well, they didn't take too kindly to that, so what they did over there is they started raising the walls of the fort with sandbags. Well, they also had another trick up their sleeves. The Loyalists, they took cannonballs and they took it over to the local blacksmith shop over here, got them red hot, just glowing red hot. And then they fired the cannon at this thing right here, hoping that they could burn it down if they just couldn't outright destroy it. Well, that didn't work too well. Clearly these guys were very clever, both sides, very clever. They had the rifle tower, they had the cannonballs, but the Patriots took it one step further. What if we dig a tunnel underneath the fort, pack it full of gunpowder, and light the thing on fire, just blow it to smithereens. Then we can go in there and take those Loyalists out of here and those British. Well, they did that. They started digging, and the tunnel actually still exists, but you can't get to it. Well, partway through, they found out that reinforcements were coming, so they decided that their time was better spent fighting a war than digging a tunnel, so they abandoned that. I'm standing inside the remnants of the fort right now. The fort has an interesting star shape to it, and it has earth mounds, which allows them to build the walls higher. The camera doesn't show it very well, but this thing is really enormous. It's huge. Back over here where it's roped off, there's a pit right there. And so the loyalists inside the fort here, they thought that if they could dig a pit, they could get water, and then they wouldn't have to haul it from the nearby township over there. So they dug down and they didn't find anything. They had to abandon the well and it didn't work. Besides, they really needed to spend their time defending the fort and not so much time digging wells. Looking back in the opposite direction, you see a line of red posts, and those mark the site of the original communications tunnel, as they called it. It really wasn't a tunnel, but it was that 3-foot deep trench that they used to shuttle supplies and men back and forth between the village, which sat over there, and the fort, which sits right over here. What you're seeing behind me here are the remains of the former town of 96, South Carolina. Well, the Patriots, they were trying to take the fort, and they ultimately didn't succeed. They found out that reinforcements were coming from the British, and so they decided to abandon their efforts. Well, the British got here and they decided that this place was too remote and not strategic enough to really want to hang on to it, so they decided to go. The Loyalists went with them, and most of the people in the village were Loyalists, and so they went with the British. They left. And so the British, they burned the town down so that it would be of no use to the Patriots. We're at the other end of the property, and way, way back over there is the big fort. This line here is the communications trench, and that leads right up to the stockade. So if you look at it, you'll see it's fortified with a fence with sharpened posts to discourage people from climbing over. Also, you can see where posts were driven into the ground to act as barriers. This is a replica of the defensive perimeter of the stockade. So the British Loyalists, they would dig these tree trunks into the ground with sharpened edges on them. And if I had to guess, I would say they probably had twice as many here as what's shown. Because if you're a Patriot army, you're trying to take the stockade, you're running up the hill, and you encounter something like this, you're going to have to really work to scramble over this. Meanwhile, you've got guys over there with guns firing at you. So it's meant to slow men down. And that's what they did. So you had Patriots trying to take the Star Fort over here. Well, they ultimately failed. But some of the Patriots were over here trying to take the stockade. But they did succeed. It says that they easily breached the walls into the stockade. Even though you had gun placements here and you had soldiers in here, I'm sure the action was hot and heavy, but they managed to get in here and they took the stockade. Well, here's the problem. A few miles away, British reinforcements were on their way, and their failure to take the fort down there made them reconsider keeping this. So the Patriots, they rallied back together again and they hightailed it out of here and let the place go. Meanwhile, the British came down and they said, you know what, this isn't worth keeping, so I want everybody to pack up, let's get out of here too. So pretty much everybody left the area. We're inside the stockade now, and this is the main headquarters. This building is solid. It's built of about 10-inch thick square timbers with chinking. On the far side, they cut the chinking out so they could put their rifles through and defend themselves. Now remember, this was a British-held fort, and local loyalists were here as well. So let's just take a quick tour around here. We have trees with sharpened tops meant to discourage people from coming over the top, although I'm sure that didn't really stop them. Over there is another place where men could stand with guns and guard the corner. Over here is another place where men could stand and guard the corners. Although I do wonder if they were really that low. I suspect that they probably had more height to it. Otherwise, you could just walk right up the back and jump over, because the ground comes right to it. And then finally, back over in this corner, is another defensive placement. Now, one of the things I'd like to draw your attention to is this was a firing bench. So you could actually have people stand up here, they could look through and see what's going on outside, and they could put their rifles through and defend the fort.
After the war, the few loyalists that did stick around had their land confiscated by the new government. The old town of 96 was never again resettled. After a time, people started coming back to this area and settled just up the hill from the old 96 town, and they called this place Cambridge. Several years later, the railroad came in 2 miles north of town. Most of the people packed up and moved closer to the railroad, and they called that town 96. And that town still exists today. At the time of the Revolution, this was Cherokee land, and the people got along really well with the Cherokees. This road behind me, this goes to Island Ford in South Carolina. Now let's look at the other direction. In this direction is the historic road to Charleston. Look at how deep the rut is from the people walking and the wagons and the horses. Isn't that a beautiful sight?
I'm walking on the old Island Ford Road headed for Charleston, South Carolina on foot. It's a slow journey, but I've just come into the town of Old 96. And there's the village right over there. I'll come in, get some food, some rest, and then the old highway continues on in that direction.
Even in colonial days, they had crossroads and highways, so to speak. We have Augusta, Georgia and Keowee, South Carolina going that direction. We have Island Ford, South Carolina that way, and Charleston, South Carolina that way.
I'm on the old road to Charleston, South Carolina, headed towards the coast. And I think this would be a great time to talk about the house. So the lenders are having an issue with the fact that there's no heat upstairs. Well, there are fireplaces up there and could be considered a source of heat if they can be shown to work. And the stairwell is wide open, so any heat that comes from downstairs should theoretically go and fill the upper floor. So there's a lot of discussion right now about whether that's going to work or not and whether that's acceptable. So we're hoping to have an answer back in a couple of days.
This is incredible. We are still on the historic Charleston Road, and look at how far back it goes. It goes for several miles. How many places actually have that much road left? It's so beautiful. Look at all that greenery. We hope to get the loan approved in the next few days, then we can get a new closing date set up. Thank you for watching and coming with us on this journey.
We really appreciate all the love, the prayers, and support as we've gone through this crazy process of just trying to buy a house. That's all we're doing, is trying to buy a house. But we're just about there. A lot of you have pointed out it's difficult because it's an old house and it has special needs. And that's why it's taking so long. But we're slowly working through all those things, and we should be done here shortly. And hopefully we'll be showing you some old house restoration in the near future.